Saving the exciting stuff for last. We're going to hear about quantum technology, killer robots, and all those kinds of things, which we've only just sort of touched on so far in the last couple of days. So I want to just briefly introduce our panel. So joined by illustrious friends and guests. So Arthur Herman from the Hudson Institute, whom I had read for years and just met at this conference. I want to plug his new book, which I haven't read, but I'm excited about, The Viking Heart. So I have a sort of personal interest in that we were talking about. But so he's gonna talk. We're gonna actually, this won't just be a discussion panel. He's gonna have a brief presentation, and then my friend and colleague Bob Marks, who is the distinguished professor of engineering at Baylor University. He's also the director of the Walter Bradley Center for Natural and Artificial Intelligence here at Discovery, one of the centers that's sponsoring this program. And he also has a short book that's a fun read called The Case for Killer Robots. So that it sort of gives you a preview perhaps of his views on these questions. And then also Steve Meyer, who will be joining us, has a conflict, so he's going to join us sort of midway through the panel, who is a senior fellow here at Discovery Institute and the director of the Center for Science and Culture, and you all know because he's been on the stage a couple of times today. But we have 1 hour, so expect at least a third of this time, though, to be reserved for question and answer. And so with that, we will start. Bob, I think we will start with you. And if you want to go from the panel here.
Some of these people come up and they do everything off the top of their head. I'm an engineer. I cannot talk in paragraphs and complete chapters like some of these people. I need these notes. So let me go ahead and do that. Yeah, we're going to be talking about, as Jay mentioned, artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, and military preparedness. And the book, The Case for Killer Robots, is available outside if you'd like to read it. As you can see, it's a very short book, and it contains some of my thoughts on this. I don't come as an expert in military matters, but as an engineer, I have done research for the Army, the Navy, DARPA, and the National Science Foundation. So I have that as my background. My expertise is in the area of artificial intelligence. I've been doing it for about 30 years. And this is the intersection, if you will, of high technology and military preparedness. One of the questions that I'm asked is, why such a provocative title, The Case for Killer Robots? Well, first of all, get your attention, right? Case for Killer Robots. One of the reasons is that there is a great resistance to anything having to do with autonomous AI in the military. There is a lot of pushback against people that want to ban these so-called killer robots. And by killer robots, we mean autonomous artificial intelligence. And some of the people that are against it, including 30 countries, over 110 NGOs, 4,500 AI experts are for banning the development of these. The European Union is against it, 26 Nobel laureates. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said in 2018 that killer robots are politically unacceptable, morally repugnant, and should be banned by international law. And the question is why is this? Where does this come from? I think it's a lot of information from misinformed journalists and from movies. Is the artificial intelligence like Skynet and the Terminator going to become self-aware and start to zap us all? Or is AI going to become our master someday? And we wake up in a chemical bath like in the Matrix where they've been sucking our vital stuff out. No, that isn't going to happen. Those are all myths. People have talked about artificial general intelligence at this conference. Do you notice that nobody has really defined it? Let me offer a definition. Artificial general intelligence is the dream that artificial intelligence will someday duplicate the characteristics that humanity has. I think that good arguments in solid computer science can be used to show that artificial intelligence will never be creative, it will never be sentient, it will never understand what it is doing, and currently it has no common sense. And so that's a lecture for another day where we could drill down on each one of these individual things. But this is the fundamental limitations of artificial intelligence. And I'm often asked, for example, well, it isn't true today, but what about in the future when computers become super duper? Well, there's something called the Church-Turing thesis, which basically says that the computers of today can't, anything you can do on them can be done on Alan Turing's original 1930s machine. Now, if you do it on Turing's machine, it'll take 1 billion times as long. But nevertheless, if we find any limitations to Turing's original machine, then they are applicable to the computers of today and the computers of tomorrow. And I maintain that indeed, artificial general intelligence is not possible because of its limitations of the inability to be creative, sentient, understand, and have common sense. And as a matter of fact, let's see. We already have autonomous AI machines, AI military weapons. Shown here, for example, is the Israeli Harpy. Now, the Israeli Harpy is what is called an anti-radiation missile. It will be launched over a predefined battlefield. It will circulate around the battlefield and then wait to be illuminated by radar. And then it follows the radar beam back to where it came from, and in a kamikaze action takes out the computer installation. Now, this can be done with a man in the loop, but it can also be done totally autonomously. So we do have examples of totally autonomous vehicles, killer robots, if you will, that are currently in use. The question I maintain is not whether we should use autonomous weapons, but rather the basic engineering concept of design ethics. Does the artificial intelligence or any engineering design do what it is designed to do and no more? And in order to establish this, you have to have domain expertise going into the design. You have to have domain expertise in the testing. And once that's done, it's up to the military users, and I would call it end-use ethics, as to what they do with it. But the engineer's purpose is to design this artificial intelligence to do what it does and no more. I think that the case for the development of killer robots in the United States military staying on the forefront of technology is to be learned from history. One of the things that we do find out is that technology wins wars. Not only does it win wars, but when perceived, it gives adversaries pause on doing anything. And when that pause is removed, you have a bigger problem. So 2 reasons that AI should be developed. There is a story given by a world leader that said, imagine a country that develops no killer robots. In fact, a country that develops nothing that would be a killing machine for the military. Those that want to beat swords into plowshares. Imagine such a country. And then the leader ends his commentary by saying, I think I should like to invade that country. I think I should like to take over that country. So that's the reason that if you remove the reason for pause, which is military might, that you're going to have problems. In history, we can go back to World War II. We had something which is pictured here, which is the Norden bomb site. At the time, this was artificial intelligence at its best, at the top level. Now, it used artificial intelligence. It used computers, but it used analog computers, and it was just the top of the line. And it literally took over the flight of the plane when it was surrendered to. The Norden bomb site measured wind velocity. It looked at the target, took in some other factors, and decided when and how to drop the bomb. And this was such cutting edge at the time that the bombardiers were required to, or instructed to, destroy the Norden bomb site in the case of capture, in the case of a crash. That was cutting edge technology. Then, today, you can buy a Norden bomb site on eBay for a few $100s. So the Norton bomb sight was cutting edge technology then. We also had radar. Radar invented in England, developed in the United States because England was too busy defending against the Nazi bombings. And all of a sudden, the Allies had problems. The enemy used to think, how are these guys looking through clouds? How can they see through clouds? And so there was a genius leaking of this totally false propaganda, which says the reason is that Allied pilots are eating more carrots. And that because they eat more carrots, their eyesight is better. And indeed, today, you hear eating carrots is good for your eyesight, right? And that is actually a remnant of this original propaganda. And like any good propaganda, like any good leaking, it had a modicum of truth, right? As I understand, carrots have vitamin K, which makes your eyesight better. But that was the reason that the Allies tried to cover up radar with the carrot story. Just fascinating stuff. We also had cracking of the Enigma code. Some of you saw the Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch playing Alan Turing, where they cracked the Enigma code, and this was technology that helped win the war. We had to have that advanced technology. And, you know, the trump card is the atomic bomb. You know that Germany had a program for the atomic bomb, as did the United States. There was a television series which was based on the idea that maybe the Germans got the atomic bomb first and won World War II. I forgot the name of the film, but you know, that's chilling. Now you might think that the atomic bomb was terrible, and it was terrible. There's no doubt about it. But Philip Jenkins, an historian, estimates that the total lives that were saved using the atomic bomb was approximately 11 million. This not only included the death of Allied and Japanese soldiers, but also related to, for example, all of the area which was occupied by Japan at the time, and the deaths which would occur there. So this brings us back to what we should do today. We didn't avoid the advancement of technology in World War II. And I wonder what would happen if the Manhattan Project, which developed the atomic bomb, was public. And there was all sorts of protest against the atomic bomb. And you know that there would be. What would have happened? And so, fortunately, they did it in total privacy. And it did what it was supposed to do, which was win the war. So what are our adversaries today saying? Our adversaries today are saying the following. Here's a quote from Vladimir Putin. He says, "Artificial intelligence is the future not only of Russia, but of all mankind." And then he ends the statement with, "Whoever becomes the leader in this sphere will become the ruler of the world." Now, did he mean economic? Did he mean militarily? I would answer both questions probably yes. So we have this problem, and there has been a governmental response to it. Donald Trump in 2019 allocated $850 million to the advancement of AI. Unfortunately, gave it to a bunch of the alphabet groups like the NSF and the NIH, who, in my opinion, do a relatively poor distribution. But also in the military, there was the formation of the Army Futures Command. The Army Futures Command was established because before this, the Army research labs were kind of disjoint. And the Army Futures Command put all of the Army research under this one umbrella. And this was headed by General John Murray. They not only look at AI, but they look at things such as biological warfare and some of the other problems we see down the road. Also formed was the JAIC, J-A-I-C, the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. Their purpose was through all of the different military organizations to distribute artificial intelligence for their application. So how are they doing? Well, it's hard to tell from the things that I'm privy to. I'm sure that a lot of their work is classified. But you might have read maybe a week or so ago that there was a guy named Nicholas Chalin, who was the first chief software officer for the United States Air Force, quit his job at the Pentagon. And he quit his job at the Pentagon because he said, right now, it was impossible for the US to compete with China on AI. Now, since he was involved in the military, I assume reading between the lines that this includes the military preparedness of the United States. And I think this is, you heard about the hypersonic missile that was launched by China recently. And, some of this stuff is really chilling. Now, I don't know who to believe in politics anymore. But the head of the JAIC came out. His name was Lieutenant General Michael Groen. He says, "Oh, no. The United States can kick the butt of anybody in the world, and the only place that China is ahead of the United States is in the accumulation of data. But in terms of the military might, the United States was still superior." Now, who to believe, Nicholas Chalin or General Michael S. Groen? I don't know. So with that, let me get to what I think is, what's that? What'd you say, George?
If you don't know.
If I don't know, nobody knows. That's right. Thank you. I think that was a compliment. So I appreciate it. So I want to talk about what I think are the major security threats in the United States so far. One of them is EMPs, and this has been around for a long time. We saw a 1.4 megaton bomb at an atmospheric discharge 900 miles off the coast of Hawaii, which when the explosion happened, it blew out street lights in Hawaii and also disrupted their electronics. And today, we can get EMPs from a number of different sources, but the thermonuclear explosion is one of the biggest ones. 250 miles above the state of Kansas, an electromagnetic explosion could take out most of the United States grid, power grid. And that's chilling stuff. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. It would take out all of our communications and take out our cell phones here. And how do EMP work? How do EMPs work? Well, your little cell phone here picks up a little microwave signal. And that microwave signal is converted into electricity, and that electricity, those electronic signals, are used to do all of the magic that you do on your cell phone, right? Well, the bigger the signal that comes through the air to your phone, the more current which is generated. And if you have an incredible pulse of this energy, the electricity which is generated, the current which is generated in these little wires, in fact, in any metal, will be so intense that it will fry whatever electronics is going on. So that is one of my fears. I did read a study which says that in order to harden the United States grid, it would take about $333 billion. So that's the cost. There are indications that China has started hardening their grid. Who knows why, right? The other thing that gives me chills for a long time, because I've done a lot of work in swarm intelligence, is swarms of drones. If you have a swarm of drones, you got a problem. If they're autonomous or even if there's a man in the loop, it doesn't matter. Because swarms are incredibly resilient. They're fault tolerant. If you've ever gone out and kicked down an anthill and stomped it, you come back in a week and that anthill is still there, right? There's a resilience. And so in order to stop a swarm of drones, you can, you have to do something. And you have to take them all out. Now, Israel has developed a little laser weapon that can bang a single drone. It has to loiter on the drone for a little while. So would it be effective on, say, a swarm of 1,000 drones? And no, it wouldn't. Now, what about one-on-one dogfights? What if we launched our drones and they begin to battle their drones? The technology there is so complex that really this is not a viable solution at all. So what is the solution to drones? I was talking to a colleague, Sarah Miller, about 6 months ago, and we were brainstorming, and she says, I know what would take out a swarm. What you need is some sort of bug spray, right? You have these swarms coming towards you, and you would like to spray bug spray. And she said an EMP would take that out. Now, you can get EMPs from thermonuclear explosions, but you can also get EMPs from what I'll call an EMP cannon. It is a very powerful antenna that launches a directive EMP pulse that takes things out. So it turns out we were talking about it, and we said, wow, we should develop this. And then about I don't know, about a month later, it was announced that Russia had developed such an EMP cannon. And then about a week or two ago, it was announced that China had developed such an EMP cannon. So this is one of the reasons that we have to stay on top of the arms race, and it just goes back and forth. You know, somebody develops something, you have to develop something better. So I wish that we could all live in a Pollyannish world where everybody was happy, but I think one of the things that is taught in the Judeo-Christian foundation is that we are fallen, and there's always going to be fallen people. And no matter what treaties we make, should go back to Chamberlain and Hitler, right? They had a nice treaty. There are always going to be people, I'm thinking of North Korea, for example, and Assad in Syria, for example. They don't care about those treaties. They're fallen. They want to seek influence just like the other people. So I am very pro-development of these artificial intelligence weapons. The work that I do for the Army and the Navy is with men and women who are associated with the research arms of various military installations like the Army and the Navy. And I can tell you, they really have a deep concern about America's military readiness. And they are very, very, it's your tax dollars well spent. I would not say that with places like the NSF and the NIH, where I think that there's lots of good things which are happening, but I think that there's also an incredible amount of waste. So I'm a big fan of the US military. Okay, so that concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Bob. All right, Arthur.
Hi, how are you? How's everything going? It's good. We're almost at the finish line. It's been an absolutely amazing conference. This is my first COSM, either as attendee or speaker, and it's an absolutely mind-blowing experience, and so many great presentations and so much great technology and ideas and concepts and celebrations of achievements in the past that really makes it an extraordinary event, and I've been very proud to be part of it, to be part of the connection with it here too. What I'm going to be doing the next 20 minutes or so is the goal has not been to blow your minds. I'm going to try and limit that aspect of my presentation and talking about cyber war and talking about quantum technology, and it's also not to be a downer after all of the uplifting and feeling really good about the direction that technology can take us in the future. Not at all. The goal is not here to be a downer, just the opposite, in fact. It's to talk about what we need to do in order to prepare ourselves for what could be coming and what is already, in fact, has happened to us. In part a result of the very things that we've been talking about in particular with regard to the connectivity and the downside as well as the good side that comes with connectivity. Now, some of you will be asking yourselves, just as a preview for this, will say, didn't Jay Richards just mention that this guy wrote a book about Vikings? And he's going to tell us about quantum technology and cyber war? How did that happen? Well, what I can tell you is that the Viking book is my 10th book. I've written a number of articles. I have a regular column on Forbes about technology and policy, including a lot of discussion about quantum technology that I put out there. I'm director of the Quantum Alliance Initiative at the Hudson Institute. And the book, The Viking Heart, How Scandinavians Conquered the World, is in part inspired by a lot of the work that I've done in the technology and in defense policy areas. And in fact, I have just finished an article entitled How to Think Like a Viking in the Age of High Tech. Once that gets published, I'll make sure you all have access to it and have a look at it, because I think you'll find it rather interesting. But anyway, I'm not going to be talking about Vikings per se, but what I am going to be doing is talking about the internet is our foundational discussion. And that is that what I think we have come to realize is that every time now when we open the net and step into the World Wide Web, that we are entering a combat zone, that it has become a war zone in which, and think about the range of threats from cyber theft, from hacking, from bullying, to denial of service attacks, phishing emails, and it's not just governments or rogue players who are engaged in this kind of attacks that come at us through the internet. It's also now companies that run it, right, with shadow banning and with cancellation and the ways in which social media now has become a minefield for those who try to negotiate and find their way around in this area. And so what has happened is that the net and the connectivity, which we were rightly celebrating in our discussion with Bob Metcalf, rightly celebrating, also has this downside today. And the issue about security is one that has to be paramount in our minds as we think about these issues now, and to realize that for the unwary, that life in the internet has become, to paraphrase the philosopher Thomas Hobbes, that life becomes nasty, brutish, and short if we're not careful, if we're not aware of those security issues. Now, and this is a problem which is going to go worse rather than less as time goes on, in part because of the way in which connectivity is going to expand exponentially. With the explosion of IoT, Internet of Things, with the establishment of 5G, in where connectivity is going to grow from a few thousand points, 10,000 points per square mile, to millions of points of connectivity in a square mile. And the way in which this is then going to exponentially expose the range of vulnerabilities that come with it. And during my time at the National Security Council, when I was senior advisor on matters of technology and policy, one of the things that we were looking at in our policy about 5G was the issue about security and the ways in which to protect that rapidly expanding access to data and networks, because it's going to become a challenge, and almost overwhelming challenge with it. Now, at the National Security Council, we worked on 4 different types of cyber attack threats. The first one, and I'll just summarize them really quickly, the first one are persistent cyber hacking and cyber theft, targeting networks, data, intellectual property, websites, and so on. And the estimated damage that's done worldwide on those kinds of attacks right now, in 2020 anyway, it comes to about $1 trillion. The second type of attack are concentrated cyber attacks prior to kinetic operations. And 2 classic examples being just before Russia invaded Georgia in 2008. They used a range of cyber operations in order to disrupt communications and to make a coordinated response impossible. And then also too in the Ukraine, in which they also integrated information warfare policies, using social media as a way to hype up and to justify an invasion of Crimea in the case of Russia. So that's the second type of cyber warfare opening that you have. Then the third type is mass targeting of civilian and military infrastructure. And this is when people talk about the threat of a cyber Pearl Harbor. Now, some cybersecurity experts would say it's not a big worry. It's not going to happen. You're not going to, because it's a decentralized system, our current internet and a lot of the infrastructure is with it, that the threat of a cyber Pearl Harbor is overestimated. Well, that could be, but the fact is that it is still one that has composed a tremendous disruption for attacks, let's say, on financial infrastructure, on power and energy grid, as well as other types of government agencies. As we've seen, government agencies, for all the time that they've spent talking about the cyber threat, they seem to be just as vulnerable as ever to the challenges that come with it. And then the fourth type, cyber attack, is an integral part of kinetic operations. That, in other words, this isn't just preparing the battlefield, but this is an ongoing operational phase of a larger military attack, denying your opponent command and control, denying surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities, including drones, as well as persistent attacks on critical infrastructure to disrupt logistics, so you can't respond effectively to a major attack. And I think we understand that if an attack were to come to confrontation between the U.S. and China in the Taiwan Straits, that we would certainly see that fourth type of operation being brought to bear. So in the what now, in terms of the next generation of cyber technology, cyber security technology, what you're seeing is an increasing focus on the first and the third types, the options A and C in terms of cyber warfare and cyber attacks. In other words, the persistent cyber hacking and cyber theft, which just goes on until you wear down the defenses and find ways to get past the firewalls and through other kinds of cyber attacks in place, or a planned, premeditated strike in order to bring down stock market, bring down the Federal Reserve, bring down the power grid, to bring down major weapons systems. That was, believe me, something that we also talked a lot about at NSC on all these issues that are coming up. And here, one of the reasons why there is such a focus, because the increasing focus on the danger. I'm going to go back to that one, stop there. Because of the future threat of large scale, or what I call prime quantum computers. And this is one of the, again, downside about the advent of quantum technology. Now I want to say something really quickly about quantum technology. We had a very interesting presentation from Julie Love a day ago from Microsoft talking about quantum computing here. But I think we want to be really clear as to what the real promise about quantum technology is all about. And I'm going to talk a little bit more, give you some brief introductions to what it is and how it functions. Not just quantum computing, but also quantum communications. But the promise of quantum, the reason why we have not just the big companies that are involved in it, like IBM and Microsoft and Intel, but also why we have to date about 450 startups that are involved in quantum technology in one aspect or another, and why inside quantum technology, the econometric marketing company figures that we're going to be looking at a quantum technology sector which is going to be worth about $250 billion by 2035. The promise is not in wide-scale commercial uses. The commercial use of quantum technology stretches way out to the horizon, way beyond the 2030s into the 2040s to 2050. The real promise is in disruptive innovation and the way in which quantum computers, but also quantum communications, can be ways in which to create disruptions which, on the one hand, will bring about big changes in commercial use of the technology, there's no doubt about that, but also big changes in its use from a national security point of view. And for that, the issue of the quantum computer is paramount with this. Because with the quantum computer's potential, what its potential includes, because of its ability, as Julie Love was saying just yesterday, that it excels at solving big compute problems with small amounts of data, is that's precisely what it can do with regard to decrypting our existing public and asymmetric and symmetric encryption systems. Everything that protects from bank accounts through to classified data to virtually every aspect of what protects data networks today. And that this kind of an attack is very different from your classical cyber attack because it will be stealthy, because it will be able to disguise itself as a user of the system. Because it'll have the key. Because by factoring those large prime numbers, it'll have the key that it can use to enter into bank accounts, disrupt assets, shut down power lines and nuclear reactors. That it will be persistent simply because it is so stealthy, there'll be a lack of detection. It won't be like your classic hack where you say, oh my God, someone's breaking into the network, and then you patch it and so on. You won't know. You won't know. So it's one which has the ability to carry on a hack and do disruptions for days, weeks, months if necessary. And then finally it's ubiquitous because public encryption is so widespread, and its uses are in the encryption done by many different companies at very different times, are so vulnerable to this single type of technology. This means that it does open up that possibility, right? If it's the movie Sneakers, remember the movie Sneakers was the Russian scientist who devised a whole box that would decrypt all the encrypted classified data, and his project was called No More Secrets, right? Well, that is the frightening prospect of what a large-scale quantum computer can do. Now, in terms of timeline, and I'll come back to this in a little bit, it's one in which the timeline stretches out, but the question of what to do about it and how to respond also stretches out and also requires a very complicated process with it. But it is that aspect of decryption that has been involved in it and that has been a big part of what we've been doing at the Quantum Alliance Initiative. I promised my team I would do a quick ad for us, for the Quantum Alliance Initiative at Hudson Institute. And what we do is work on developing ties of international cooperation in all aspects of quantum technology, not just quantum computing, but also quantum communications, quantum sensing, and quantum cybersecurity at the same time. We've got 19 members since our founding in 2018. We've got 19 members from 10 countries who are part of this, and just about every week I get somebody who calls up and sort of says, hey, we'd like to know more about the Quantum Alliance Initiative and how we get involved with it. Quantum companies as well as cybersecurity interest in this area. And we also work not just on the security aspects or about policy aspects, but also about the technology of it. And one of the things that we did in 2018, 2019 was to work out global standards for quantum random numbers generators and also quantum key distribution, which we presented to the ITU at Geneva and received their approval for those. The last leg of it in 2020. So really quickly about the difference between quantum computers and classical computers. The difference is that with quantum computers, what you're using is qubits, which can be in multiple states because of their quanta nature at the same time. That unlike a digital bit, which is either a 1 or a 0, a quantum bit can be a 1 or a 0 or a 1 and 0 or a 0 and 1. You can get 4 states out of one bit that you're using for your calculations. And when you add more of these bits together, then your computing power grows exponentially, and that's what that graph is trying to show you there. Power increases exponentially to the number of qubits. Quantum computers do have their downside, which has made their advent more difficult, more challenging. They have high error rates because the qubits don't behave. They become entangled and then decohere without rhyme or reason. You can't look at them, you can't measure them while they're doing that because they'll disappear right away and the connection is severed. So it's one that requires a certain degree of sort of kindergarten style discipline in order to keep the qubits working and operating in those nanoseconds when you can do actual corrections. And it needs to be kept ultra cold. Now that part is not necessarily true. That is true for the big superconducting logic gate quantum computers like Microsoft is doing and that IBM and Google are doing. But there's also other models that are being used for quantum computer, like ion trap models, for example. I can talk more about that during Q&A if you're interested, or learn about it at our QA website. But those do not require those kinds of ultra cold cybernetic cryogenic settings in which to carry out their calculations. And that is a very promising area for where things could advance intermediately. And then finally at the bottom, they're well suited for tasks like optimization problems, huge possibilities for understanding supply chains and being able to get the most out of multiple sources for supply chains. It's one of the things that I've written about for data analysis and for simulations. Now you'll notice that this one does not mention, and for decryption of existing public encryption systems. And you'll notice that Julie Love didn't happen to mention that as part of what a Microsoft quantum computer could do as well. We don't really which one of the things you'll notice is that those companies don't advertise that aspect of their work that they do. You know, when you're building a hydrogen bomb next door, you don't sort of say, oh, we're building a hydrogen bomb here next door. Don't worry about it. Everything's going to be fine. But Microsoft knows very well about this, about the dark side of this technology. In fact, they have been working for the last 2-3 years to inform their customers about the need for quantum cybersecurity and protection. They have an ambassador, Brian Lamacchia, who goes on tour to talk to customers and to give presentations about cybersecurity and the quantum computer threat. He's a great guy. I've stolen his slides from time to time as part of my work on it. It's good stuff. But it is the reality of when we reach that kind of large scale of about 3,000 qubits. Right now, 3,000 to 4,000 opens the door to it. People talk about million qubits and so on, but they're talking about it in terms of million qubits tolerating a very high error rate. The controls on limiting the error rate and the disruption and the diversion and dissipation of entanglement, those problems are getting solved every day. There's a lot of work that's being done on that. Right now, the Chinese are up to about 113 qubits on their last one. So we've got a ways to go. We've got a ways to go to the 3,000 to 4,000 area, and that's actually good news as opposed to bad news. This is a chart. You'll notice the source is Microsoft. This is probably one of Brian Lamacchia's, as a matter of fact. But what he's done is to show how breaking down the different public symmetric and public key encryption systems, the most popular ones and the best known ones, including elliptic curve, which is very popular for use with blockchain, and the green box and also the orange box, the red box on the left, simply inform that these are going to be impacted or even solved by quantum computers and their use in this development. So Microsoft knows perfectly well what the future holds, and other cybersecurity firms do as well. Now, what this interest in what the quantum computer tech looked like led us to do a project at Quantum Alliance Initiative to answer the question, what would a quantum computer tech on the US financial system look like? And we partnered with Oxford Economics, the global econometric firm, to do some numbers, to run some numbers on that. And what we found is that if you look at, for example, the standard input-output model that the Rand Corporation used for understanding, disrupting, let's say, JP Morgan Chases, that we're talking about 3.5 billion total losses for the American economy. That was back in 2011. But what we've done with our model is to look at the contagion effects throughout this financial sector of this kind of disruption and this kind of an attack. And what we've seen is that the federal funds service payment system, if that were disrupted, access to it, we're talking about a cascading financial failure costing between $7.73 billion to $1.95 trillion. We also have done a study now, which was just about to be published, on possible future quantum computer attack on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And what we found with that one, after looking at the ways in which cryptocurrencies have now really become increasingly embedded in the financial sector and will continue to be so, and will continue to grow as they become more essential to the running of markets, that there we came up with using, again, our Oxford Economics model, direct losses to crypto investors of about 1.8 billion, and then total losses to U.S. economy about $3.3 billion. When the report is published, I'll be happy to send you. We'll be able to look at the assumptions and the methodologies we use to arrive at those kinds of numbers for our overall discussion. Now, here we come to the most important slide, which is don't panic. This is not something to get all worked up and to rush out and to sell your cryptocurrencies. There may be other reasons to do that, but not right now, but not having to do with regard to quantum computer attack. First of all, because of the timeline, and that is a large-scale quantum computer, the type that can do this sort of breakdown. We're looking at something that would come in about 10 years. Could be sooner. The CEO of Google says 5 to 10 years. Hard to know. Hard to know when that's hype and when that's good engineering when thinking about. But I think that's one of the keys to understand about quantum computers is that now we are at a stage in which the real issues is no longer a scientific one of reaching to a large-scale quantum computer, but it's engineering problems. is what lies ahead. And you notice what Julie Love said the other day. She said that the real problem now, that the future now for advancing quantum computer technology, pushing it out to that level, is material science. And what she's saying is it's not something about quantum computing itself as a technology. It's about the ways in which the different materials that you can use that will enable superconducting, that will make qubits more stable. The use of lasers, for example, with ion trap quantum computers, developments in where you're being able to replace large-scale cryogenics, so it's no longer necessary to have these massive platforms on which to carry out these sorts of calculations. Here, the other reason is that with post-quantum cryptography, in other words, algorithm-based security against quantum intrusion, is that it's already here. In fact, the National Institute of Standards and Technology have been working on and reaching their final nominees for the 5 different mathematical formulas for making quantum-resistant algorithms. They're planning to announce the finalists. Originally, they were going to say in 2024. Then they decided maybe they'd want to move a little bit sooner than that. And so now they're talking about announcing it maybe next year. But certainly the rollout coming between 2022 and 2024. And those are going to be, again, software-based way in which you have algorithms which are just too tough for even a quantum computer to factor down to its two original, the product of 2 original numbers. That's what the real challenge that goes with that. And then there's the other option is quantum cryptography itself. In other words, building in quantum-enabled solutions that protect data and networks by turning the quantum technology into a purely random one-time pad approach to cryptography here. And that's the promise that comes with quantum cryptography, and also with quantum communications, with the ways in which you can use entangled photons as a way to communicate and establish links between point to point, and then eventually to really create networks that operate in this space. And I have a prediction for you. I have a bet. I will bet you that quantum communications will actually come into commercial use before we see large-scale quantum computers. In fact, I just won the bet, because there are already companies that are in fact using quantum communications and quantum key distribution in order to do that. Some of them are members of our Quantum Alliance initiative, for example. A quantum exchange, which set up a relay in Wall Street using the Holland Tunnel to create a QKD network, unhackable network with that. Quintessence Labs in Australia has also commercial companies who use that to protect the crown jewels for corporate secrets, because it's unhackable. Once someone tries to break in, the connection is severed, and both parties know that someone's been trying to disrupt in the process. ID Quantique in Switzerland also has corporate clients and who are building these networks, these hack-proof networks all the time. So these things are already in existence. They're already in place here, and between that and the post-quantum cryptography, what we're looking at is a way in which to mitigate risks for a threat which is on the far horizon. It's not an imminent threat, but it's one which the time it will take to prepare for it, to make sure that all links are set up are best to do. And let me just say this in conclusion. I have a very good friend who has worked in the banking industry for decades, and he told me about an old, crusty old banker friend of his who told him that risk. He said, "What is risk?" And the banker said, "Risk is the price you never thought you'd have to pay." And that is what we're talking about with quantum cryptography, what we're doing at Quantum Alliance Initiative and elsewhere. Is about mitigating that risk, the price that you never imagined you'd have to pay, that goes with it, that goes with new technologies and with the connectivity and with the complex financial and web-based world in which we now function and now work. And I'm done.
Thanks so much, Art.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a few minutes. I'm going to just move my chair back over here. Steve, do you want the first response here? Yeah, it should get you a mic. Let me just get over here.
We invited Arthur out because he is a relentlessly curious person, as he puts it, writing books on the Vikings and being at the cutting edge of technological issues and national security. And once we got him out here, I thought, I'm going to yield my time. I had some things to share. But one thing I'd like to highlight is a book that Arthur previously wrote called Freedom's Forge. And it tells the story. Yeah, it's a tremendous book, absolutely. It's a tremendous book. And it tells the story of the way in which Roosevelt mobilized the captains of industry in the run-up to World War II, and how by the end of the war, we were producing how many bombers a day, and out of the
We were building 8 aircraft carriers a month by 1944, and a fighter plane or bomber every 15 minutes. It's pretty good. Just talk to anybody at Pentagon about numbers like that and see what their reaction is.
It's an incredible story, and one of the things we've been talking about, Arthur and I and several other think tank guys have collaborated and pushing forward some defense technologies in a kind of cooperative effort. But one of the things we've been talking about is creating a program that helps to foster that kind of collaborative effort between private tech firms today and the DoD. And that there's a tremendous conflict of cultures. We read, a little while ago about how Google was cooperating with the CCP, but not with our own military, And,
Robert knows about that.
Microsoft is a very different sort of company here. They're very much more pro-defense, but it seemed like one of the things that think tank people can do is get people to the table with conferences to break down some of those cultural divides and get our tech industry coordinating and supporting national defense efforts. And so, a conference like this is just, kind of tip of the iceberg of some of the efforts that are going on behind the scenes to make that happen.
Well, can I have one more ad for the Freedom's Forge? One of the things that when I was at National Security Council, I was most pleased about was when I learned that Freedom's Forge had been the inspiration for the work that was done on Operation Warp Speed. And I read this in the New York Times, and you know what happens when you read the New York Times? You say, "I wonder if that's true." So I asked around, and sure enough, yeah, the head of Operation Warp Speed, General Gustav Perna, who had been head of Army Materiel Command, had known the book Freedom's Forge, had used it a lot while he was head of AMC. And then when he got the call and said, "You're not retiring, actually, it was the day before he was supposed to retire. You say you're going to be heading up this effort to turn out 20 million vaccines by December." He told me, so what he did is he got down his copy of Freedom's Forge and opened it up. And that was his guidebook for thinking about vaccine as a manufacturing problem, right? Not as a healthcare problem, as a manufacturing program. And it was great because I got to go down to HHS to go tour the facility. They asked me to speak on the operations center because everybody knew about the Freedom's Forge things. Definitely a highlight for me. Not just for NSC, but elsewhere too.
That's great. It's a great story. Well, so we have a few minutes, and I think this is our single mic, but I want, Bob, you to just quickly explain, because I'm sort of mystified that there are so many groups, including even the EU, that have come out against, AI-enabled weapons. And I'm trying to imagine, these aren't just activist organizations, obviously. And so what exactly do they have in mind for an alternative?
I don't think they do. I don't think they've looked beyond their shoes. They're looking at their toes instead of in the future. And when my daddy told me to drive, he said, "Don't look right in front of you, look at where you're going." So that's what needs to be done with these people. The surprising thing is that there were, I forget how many, 3,500 so-called AI experts that signed this petition. I have some theories on that. It turns out that the people that are involved in AI right now, you might think they drill down deep into the software, and no, that's not true. Both Google and Facebook have made through this open source AI where, let's see, Google's is referred to as well, PyTorch is the Amazon.com. Google's is TensorFlow. And these are things which my students use and other students use and people in China use, which is incredibly powerful software, which is able to do artificial intelligence, and it's totally available for free. Not only is the software available for free, but they give you computing time where you can use the software and compute using their facilities and not your own. And in talking to other people, the reason that some of these AI experts still believe in AGI is I don't think that they have been introduced to the ideas of fundamental computer science. And not, the second thing is that they drill in, they use these available software as black boxes and really haven't looked at the details of how these black boxes work. They just know that they can do miraculous things. And of course, if you can do something today, you can do 20 times that in 10 years, and pretty soon you'll reach AGI. So I think it's a fallacy of extrapolation of where we're at, not recognizing the concrete ceiling that the science of AI or the science of computer science dictates.
I mean, this seems to be a place in which, of course, at Discovery Institute, we've been talking about the difference between weak and strong AI for a long time, and it's in many ways a kind of philosophical debate. But it's one of these places where this is not merely philosophical. I mean, if you imagine that we're going to get Skynet, that can end up having very deadly consequences.
Just one real brief thing on that. It builds on Eric Larson's book and talk about the distinction between artificial general intelligence and task-specific intelligence. And Matt McElwain and Arthur had a conversation the other night. Well, if AGI is either impractical in the long term or impossible, and we have this problem with surveillance AI, especially the way it's being used in our some of our big tech companies today, and with the social credit system in China, how do we use AI? And where's the middle of the fairway? And so we've been talking about the idea of autonomy and democracy as a kind of framing for the development of AI technology within sort of some political, moral, legal guidelines that are consistent with our Western traditions, and also recognize we spend an awful lot of time trying to develop something that probably can't be developed with AGI. So, and I think defense is one of the areas where there's a huge upside in AI technology that allows us to develop, for example, just these drones we've been looking at as a kind of autonomous entity that can be using those AI kinds of technology. So I think just as a philosophical framing, we're looking for the middle of the fairway, and there's a lot of things with autonomous vehicles, autonomous drones, and a lot of military technology that can be beneficially advanced using AI that doesn't either try to waste time on AGI or get involved with surveillance of our individual citizens in a way that violates their civil liberties.
One of the things also that I think is happening is that there is growing evidence that so-called narrow AI is going to be successful. And most of the things that Steve mentioned have been task-specific. And as soon as you start to broaden the complexity of the artificial intelligence, you come up with all sorts of unintended contingencies. And if you see broad AI, you get into problems like the self-driving Uber car that killed the pedestrian. That became it was a conflict between a couple of sensors that delayed the decision, and it killed the AI. So the more, in fact, we've just published a paper showing that as the complexity of a system increases linearly, the contingencies, unexpected, not grow exponentially. And so if you do an AGI, then man, you're going to have all sorts of problems. The second thing I would mention is that this current trend is away from AGI. There is a place called Kaggle. Kaggle is a repository of all sorts of training data that scholars can use to train their artificial intelligence. And many times people come on and they offer big bucks for people that can solve a specific problem. They have a contest. Actually, it's a really cheap way to get a lot of labor done. because they offer like a 100K prize. Maybe some of you are old enough to remember when Netflix put out that grand challenge that they wanted a better artificial intelligence to predict the sort of stuff that we would watch. I mean, those are the sort of things that go on in Kaggle all the time. And the trend now is not for more general AI to do this, but the AI is zooming in. For example, if they're doing image recognition, the people that win the contest are doing all of this pre-processing where they put human insight and human knowledge into the program in order to get it to work. And the more domain expertise you can place into the program, the better it's going to be. So it's not going in the direction of AGI, it's going totally in the opposite direction right now.
Bob, are you saying that computers aren't very good at solving problems we don't program them to solve? Is that
Exactly. That gets back to my contention that AI is never going to be creative. And I don't mean the Turing test. The Turing test has been used and has been shown to be a failure in the sense that it's always gamed. But there's a guy at Rensselaer named Somer Bringsjord who came up with what I think is the definitive test, which is the Lovelace test, which is a computer will be creative when what it does is beyond the explanation or intent of its programmer or an equivalent expert. And there has been nothing which has been creative according to that test. You might have heard of Go, for example. It did this incredible move that nobody anticipated, and everybody said, that's creative. No, it wasn't creative. Go, that program was trained to play Go. That's what it did. And if you went up and asked that program, explain to me how you play Go, it couldn't tell you the rules. Okay, it was a very narrow AI sort of specification.
Please join me in thanking this panel. It's terrific. Thank you.